Today is Kansas Department of Transportation budget hearing. And so we will get started with Merle.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Merle Riedel. I'm a fiscal analyst with Legislative Research. Today, I'll be reviewing the agency budget request and governor recommendation for the Kansas Department of Transportation. I would just refer you to a document with a blue band across the top that says Kansas Department of Transportation. Also joining us today is Calvin Reed, Secretary of Transportation. Looking on page 1, going down below the table, just a reminder, the purpose of the Kansas Department of Transportation is to coordinate the planning, development, and operation of the various modes and systems of transportation within the state. KDOT has administrative or planning responsibilities for aviation, highways, public transportation, railroads, and waterways. However, the agency's efforts focus primarily on approximately 10,000 miles of state highway systems. Of 10,000 miles of the state's highway systems, more than 140,000 total miles of public roads and highways. KDOT traditionally has 5 programs: administration, transportation planning and modal support, local support, maintenance, and construction. The Kansas Infrastructure Hub was added as a 6th program in FY 2023, primarily to account for one-time addition of discretionary funding from the American Rescue Plan Act. Just a note on state operations and capital improvements. In a state agency budget, state operations include agency operating costs for salaries and wages and other operating expenditures. The KDOT budget differs from other agency budgets in that expenditures typically considered as state operations are included with budgeted capital improvement expenditures. For example, the construction program includes capital improvement expenditures, but also contains expenditures classified as state operations. I would refer you to page 4. On that page, you'll see a tabular representation of the agency's request for FY 2024 and 25 and the governor's recommendation. Below that table, you'll see a graph of total expenditures or reportable expenditures. And just a reminder that this agency is primarily funded from the State Highway Fund, which receives revenue from motor fuel taxes, sales taxes, and reimbursements from federal transportation dollars. Going on to page 5, we'll get into the 2024 analysis. Below that table, you'll see legislative approved. So subsequent to the 2023 session, no adjustments were made to the $2.2 billion approved for the Kansas Department of Transportation for FY 2024. Under the agency estimate, the agency submits a revised estimate of $2.2 billion, including $1.8 billion from the State Highway Fund in expenditures in FY 2024. This is an all funds increase of $87.9 million, including a State Highway Fund increase of $45.8 million, above the 2024 approved amount. The revised estimate includes 2,288.8 FTE positions, which is an increase of 3.5 FTE positions above the 2024 approved amount. So we'll review some of the significant adjustments. Item 2, salaries and wages. The revised estimate includes an increase of $3.2 million, all from the State Highway Fund, for salaries and wages expenditures in FY 2024. This increased funding addresses staffing needs primarily for traffic safety, public communications, and highway maintenance, as well as increased employer contributions for fringe benefits. The agency indicates the position increase is due to staffing needs for public communication positions in the administration program and traffic safety positions in the transportation and modal support program. Item 3, heavy equipment. The revised estimate includes a decrease of $1.2 million for replacement of heavy equipment used for highway maintenance in FY 2024. The agency notes additional equipment was purchased in FY 2023 above the original estimate, which reduces the need for replacement in FY 2024. Going down to item 5, engineering contractual services. The revised estimate includes an increase of $48 million in contractual engineering services for projects under the Ike Transportation Plan in FY 2024. The increased services support planning, right-of-way acquisition, and inspection of highway preservation and expansion projects. Item 6, the Rail Service Improvement Fund. The revised estimate includes an increase of $29.8 million, all from the Rail Service Improvement Fund for grants and assistance to qualified entities in FY 2024. The increase is primarily due to receipt of a Federal Railroad Administration grant totaling $28.9 million. The increase is also attributed to a transfer of unencumbered balance from the Short Line Rail Improvement Fund to conform with 2023 House Bill 2335, which essentially combined those two rail funds. The adjustment provides a total of $40.4 million in expenditures for FY 2024 to support track maintenance and rehabilitation of railroad and rolling stock. Item 7, Innovative Technology Grants. The revised estimate includes an increase of $9.9 million, which includes $4.5 million from the Transportation Technology Development Fund and $5.4 million from the Broadband Infrastructure Construction Grant Fund in FY 2024. The increase is attributable to carryover funding from FY 2023. So this adjustment provides a total of $8.5 million in expenditures from the Transportation Technology Development Fund for grants supporting the development of technologies that increase efficiency and safety. The adjustment also provides $15.4 million in expenditures from the Broadband Infrastructure Construction Fund for grants supporting broadband projects, such as layering fiber conduit during highway construction. Item 8, Kansas Airport Improvement Grant. The revised estimate includes an increase of $885,615, all from the Public Use General Aviation Airport Development Fund for grants to local airports for planning, constructing, and rehabilitating facilities in FY 24. The increase is attributable to carryover funding from FY 2023. This adjustment provides a total of $10.9 million in expenditures for this purpose. Public transit, item 9. The revised estimate includes a decrease of $5.5 million in aid and assistance for the transportation of persons with disability, elderly adults, and the general public, which includes bus services, in FY 2024. The agency indicates the decrease in FY 2024 is due to the availability of unspent funds at local coordinated transit districts that were awarded in the previous years. Item 10, construction preservation. And the next several items relate to the construction program, which is really where the bulk of the highway construction projects are contained. And just as a reminder, when we reference preservation, that is maintaining the roads in as-built condition. Modernization would bring those roads up to current safety standards, and expansion is actually adding new roads or new lanes to the highway system. Construction preservation, the revised estimate includes an increase of $47.4 million in capital improvement preservation projects to maintain those roads and bridges on the state highway system in as-built condition. The increase is primarily attributable to increased non-interstate resurfacing and bridge repair. Item 11, construction expansion. The revised estimate includes an increase of $41.7 million in expansion projects on the state highway system. Increase is primarily attributable to increased capacity improvement projects, such as the US 40 highway in Douglas County. And the increase is partially offset by decreased economic development and cost share projects, which are essentially grant programs supporting local roads. Item 12, construction modernization. The revised estimate includes a decrease of $112 million in modernization projects that bring roads on the state highway system up to current safety standards. The decrease is primarily attributed to decreased roadway improvements, such as pavement replacement and shoulder widening. Item 13, construction local. The revised estimate includes a decrease of $3.9 million in local projects. The decrease is attributed to decreased federal aid projects, which is partially offset by an increase in the City Connecting Link program. Item 14, buildings. The revised estimate includes an increase of $23.9 million, all from the State Highway Fund for capital improvement expenditures for buildings in FY 2024. Increase is primarily due to construction of a new District 1 headquarters in East Topeka. Item 15, highway bond issuance cost. The revised estimate includes an increase of $900,000, all from the Highway Bond Debt Service Fund, for administrative costs associated with issuing $200 million in new highway bonds for the Ike Transportation Plan and refunding previous bonds in FY 2024. These administrative costs include fees for bond counsel, rating agencies, and escrow agents. Debt interest payments on those new bonds will begin in FY 2025. Moving down to the governor's recommendation, the governor concurs with the agency's revised estimates and recommends no changes. Mr. Chairman, I can stand for questions or move on to FY 2025.
Any questions for Merle on 24? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Chair. There's questions all along here. I'm just going to start on page 5 where it talks about the agency submits the $2.2 billion, including 1 point from the State Highway Fund. Where do the funds from the State Highway Fund come from?
Revenue to the State Highway Fund largely comes from motor fuel taxes and sales tax. There's also federal funds that are used to reimburse expenditures for some of those highway projects. So, and I think there's also some revenue that comes from permitting and other aspects, but the majority of it comes from motor fuels tax, sales tax, and federal funds.
And then like number 6, rail service improvement comes from the rail service fund. Is that money all coming in from the railroads themselves? Is it state money?
No, the rail service improvement fund is largely funded with a transfer from the State Highway Fund. And in this instance, there's an additional $28.9 million in federal railroad administrative funds that also go into that fund.
So we're using the bank of KDOT.
So this would be from a transfer from the State Highway Fund to the Rail Service Improvement Fund.
Okay. And it just goes on more and more. Okay. I'm just trying to figure out where the money actually comes from these, because it looks like a substantial increase again. So thank you.
Any further questions? Let's go to 25.
All right, looking on FY 2025. So I would refer the committee to page 10 for the FY 2025 analysis. Below that table, you'll see the agency requests $2.3 billion, including $1.9 billion from the State Highway Fund in expenditures for FY 2025. This is an all funds increase of $54.9 million, including a State Highway Fund increase of $99 million, above the 2024 revised estimate. The request includes 2,288.8 FTE positions, which is unchanged from the FY 2024 revised estimate. Significant adjustments include item 1, salaries and wages. The request includes a decrease of 593,342, all from the State Highway Fund for salaries and wages expenditures in FY 24. The decrease is primarily attributed to lower employer contributions for CAPERS, which is partially offset by increased contributions for group health insurance. Item 2, heavy equipment. The request includes an increase of $1.6 million for replacement of heavy equipment, primarily dump trucks for highway maintenance in FY 2025. The agency notes this increase would restore reductions for heavy equipment that were implemented in FY 24 and resume the regular schedule for equipment replacement. Item 3, engineering contractual services. The request includes a decrease of $1 million for contractual services for projects under the Ike plan. The decrease is attributable to decreased services in the administration and construction programs, partially offset by increased services in the transportation planning and modal support program. Moving down to item 5, Rail Service Improvement Fund. The request includes a decrease of $28.4 million, all from the Rail Service Improvement Fund for grants and assistance to qualified entities. The decrease is primarily due to receipt of that federal railroad administrative grant in FY 2024 That grant is not available in FY 2025. So that adjustment leaves a total of $12 million in expenditures from the fund for FY 2025. Item 6, innovative technology grants. The request includes a decrease of $11.9 million, which includes $6.5 million from the Transportation Technology Development Fund and $5.4 million from the Broadband Infrastructure Construction Grant Fund for FY 2025. This is primarily due to carryover funding that was available in FY 2024, but not anticipated for FY 2025. Item 7, the Kansas Airport Improvement Program. The request includes a decrease of $885,615, all from the Public Use General Aviation Airport Development Fund for grants to local airports in FY 2025. The decrease is again due to carryover funding that was available in FY 2024 that's not anticipated for FY 2025. That leaves a total of $10 million for those grants to airports in 2025. Item 8, public transit. The revised estimate includes a decrease of $5.6 million in aid and assistance for the transportation of persons with disabilities, older adults, and the general public. Agency indicates the decrease is primarily due to decreased capital assistance to local organizations for the purchase of public transit vehicles, which can vary significantly from year to year based on prior year purchases. Item 9 is the Special City and County Highway Fund. The request includes a decrease of $1.7 million, all from the Special City and County Highway Fund for formula aid to local governments for street and road improvements in FY 2025. The decrease is due to a transfer of $4.2 million SGF to supplement the fund in FY 2024. And that supplement would not be available in FY 2025. So that one-time transfer of SGF in 2024 was approved by the 2023 legislature, and it was implemented to offset decreased motor fuel revenue estimates. Item 10, construction expansion. The request includes an increase of $139.3 million in capital improvement expansion projects on the state highway system. The increase is primarily attributed to increased capacity projects, such as the Polk-Quincy Viaduct in Topeka and the US 54 highway. The increase is also due to increased economic development and cost share program projects. Item 11, construction modernization. The request includes a decrease of $16.6 million in modernization projects. Again, that brings roads on the state highway system up to current safety standards. The increase is primarily attributed to increased roadway improvements, partially offset by decreased integration of emerging technologies. Item 12, construction local. The request includes a decrease of $13.2 million in local projects. The decrease is attributable to decreased federal aid projects, which is partially offset by an increase for the local bridge transfer program. Construction preservation. The request includes a decrease of $5 million in preservation projects to maintain roads and bridges in an as-built condition. The decrease is partially attributed to decreased non-interstate resurfacing, roadway improvements, and highway sign replacement, which is partially offset by increased bridge replacements. Item 14, buildings. The request includes a decrease of $35.8 million, all from the State Highway Fund, for capital improvement expenditures for buildings in 2025. Decrease is primarily attributed to expenditures for construction of that District 1 headquarters in Topeka and sub-area modernization efforts that occur in 2024 but do not reoccur in 2025. Item 15, the highway bond debt service. The request includes an increase of $2.5 million, all from the highway bond debt service fund for FY 2025 to finance debt service on highway bonds supporting highway construction projects. The increase is attributable to increased principal payments on existing bonds. The adjustment provides a total of $170.8 million in debt service expenditures for 2025, which includes an estimated $4 million in initial interest payments on those $200 million in new bonds issued in 2024 for the Ike Transportation Plan. So debt principal payments on those new bonds is estimated to begin in FY 2026. Moving on to the governor's recommendation, the governor recommends $2.3 billion, including $1.9 billion from the State Highway Fund and expenditures for 2025. This is an increase of $388,245 above the 2025 requested amount. The recommendation includes 2,288 positions, which is unchanged. The governor's recommendation includes the following adjustments. Item 16, shift differential and standby pay. The recommendation includes an increase of $315,245, all from the State Highway Fund, for increased differential and standby pay for certain employees, including those responsible for snow and ice removal on the state highway in FY 2025. Item 17, tool and PPE allowance. The recommendation includes an increase of $70,000, all from the State Highway Fund, to increase the tool and personal protective equipment allowances for employees in the maintenance program in FY 2025. Item 18, State Highway Fund transfer. The governor recommends a transfer of $361,266 from the Mental Health Grant Fund at KDADS to the State Highway Fund for FY 2025. This transfer returns the unspent balance from an FY 2022 State Highway transfer to KDADS for mental health grants, which was replaced with SGF monies. Mr. Chairman, members, I would just draw your attention to page 14 under special topics. You'll see transfers from the State Highway Fund. The table below shows transfers from the State Highway Fund to other state agencies as directed in the annual appropriations bills. These transfers are traditionally categorized as either ordinary or extraordinary. Ordinary transfers generally have some relationship to transportation projects at other agencies or have occurred for a number of years. Extraordinary transfers largely ended after FY 2022. On that table, you'll see down below ordinary transfers. So some examples of those would be transfers to the Kansas Highway Patrol, which provides law enforcement on the highway system, transfers to the Department of Education School Bus Safety Fund, the Department of Wildlife and Bridges for roads and bridges in state parks, and transfers to the Department of Revenue Division of Vehicles, which is responsible and has a role for collecting some of the revenue that goes into the State Highway Fund. Under extraordinary transfers, you'll see some of those largely ended in FY 22. So you'll see there were transfers to the State General Fund, and there was a transfer to KDADS for those mental health grant funds. And finally, I have one more section to review, Mr. Chairman. I would refer the committee to page 30, capital improvements. Kansas Department of Transportation maintains 983 buildings totaling 3.1 million square feet. Structures include 207 buildings housing KDOT, Kansas Highway Patrol personnel, offices, shops, labs, and 776 support structures functioning as chemical equipment, material storage facilities. In addition, there's 36 safety rest area buildings maintained throughout the state. The table there represents the agency's request for capital improvements related to buildings. I would note the capital improvement budget was heard in the Joint Committee on State Building Construction, and they concurred with the governor's recommendation. Below that table, you'll see the agency submits a revised estimate of $48.4 million, all from the State Highway Fund for capital improvements for buildings. This is an increase of $23.9 million above the 2024 approved amount. The increase is primarily attributed to the construction of that District 1 headquarters. Some of the items within the request is rehabilitation and repair. The agency requests $5.9 million for rehabilitation and repair of the various buildings throughout the department's collection of buildings. Expenditures target repairs and equipment replacement for improved energy efficiency, emergency repairs, and other unanticipated utility-related occurrences. Re-roofing buildings, the agency requests $785,970 for re-roofing projects at 9 locations. Those locations include Abilene Salt Storage, Anthony Dome, Atwood Dome, Hill City Dome, Iola Cone, Junction City Office, Montgomery County Safety Rest Area, Speaker Road Chemical Storage, and the Syracuse Dome. Next item is sub-area modernization. The agency requests $14.5 million for sub-area modernization at 4 locations. The agency states that the sub-area facilities were constructed largely in the 1950s and 60s. These facilities are insufficient to accommodate modern equipment, such as dump trucks outfitted with snowplows and salt spreaders. Sub-area modernization locations for 2024 include Altoona, Atchison, Osage City, and Yates Center. Land purchase, the agency requests $500,780 for the purchase of land in 2024. These land purchases support or improve KDOT operations and include requests for land along the highway to provide an area to mix and store maintenance material, land adjacent to current KDOT facilities to allow for expansion of storage and operations, or land to relocate KDOT facilities for safety and effectiveness. Land purchases in 24 include Erie, Lyons, and Topeka. Chemical storage facility, the agency requests $729,246 for construction of salt storage facilities at the Gage sub area in Topeka and Pratt for 2024. Area shop bay extension and electrical update, the agency requests $1.7 million to extend bays and update electrical systems at shop areas. The project extends the bays by 30 feet and adds an overhead exit door, affording drive-through access. The project also consolidates electrical systems from different portions of the shop building and updates main service panels to 800 amp, 3-phase, 208 volt services. This would replace service panels that do not meet current code requirements. Updates for 2025 regarding area shop bay extensions include the Syracuse shop. Next is the District 1 headquarters construction in Topeka. The agency requests $24.2 million to construct a new District 1 headquarters in Topeka for FY 2024. Project completion is estimated for the summer of 2025. The current complex, located at 121 Southwest 21st Street in Topeka, was constructed in 1934. The agency indicates the current facility is inadequate to store modern vehicles and requires transport through heavy equipment through a congested urban core. Construction in FY 2024 includes a 32,000 square foot maintenance shop, 14,000 square foot administrative building on KDOT property at Southwest 21st Street and Rice Road near the I-70 interchange in East Topeka. These projects were approved by the 2023 legislature. Future plans include relocating the District 1 materials lab to this site in the out years. And the governor concurs with the agency's revised estimate for capital improvements in 2024. On page 23, you'll see capital improvements for 2025. The agency requests $12.5 million for capital improvements for buildings in 2025. It's a decrease of $35.8 million. Decrease is primarily attributed to that District 1 headquarters in Topeka and sub-area modernization efforts that occur in 2024 but do not reoccur in 2025. Items under here include rehabilitation and repair. The agency requests $5.2 million. Re-roofing buildings, the agency requests $659,080 for re-roofing projects at 8 locations. Sub-area modernization, the agency requests $4.6 million. For sub-area modernizations in 2 locations. Those include Lincoln and Lyons. Chemical storage facility, the agency requests $285,133 for construction of salt storage facilities in Osage City. An area shop bay extension and electrical update, the agency requests $1.8 million to extend bays and update electrical systems, primarily at the Dodge City shop. And the governor concurs with the agency's request for capital improvements for 2025. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my overview, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Merle. Any questions on 25? Representative Resman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 10 on the salaries and wages, it says that there's going to be lower employer contributions to the retirement system. Why is that?
I think that's just an estimate that's typically done across all state agencies, projecting what those employer contributions based on a variety of factor. And the agency is actually sort of given an index of what that would be. And for this instance, it's a decrease in employer contributions.
Any further questions for Merle? Representative Delperday.
Thank you, Chair. Page 11, number 6, you keyed up a little bit on the broadband infrastructure. Is that federal money? Is it IRA money? And does that come into play in multiple facets of this bill?
So I think that and the Secretary of Transportation may have more information on this. I think there is federal funding that is available for some of those broadband projects. I think this particular grant program primarily relies on a transfer from the State Highway Fund for those broadband projects. I think typically for the agency, they collaborate with the Office of Broadband Expansion and the Department of Commerce to select some of those projects.
Thank you.
Any further questions? All right. Thank you, Merle. Next up, we will have Secretary Calvin Reed. Thank you for joining us today, Secretary.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Let's see. Do you have the clicker? All right. Okay, good. All right. So as we get set up, I'll try to answer a few of the questions. Some of them will be answered throughout the presentation. Really, I do want to appreciate Merle for all the detailed information he provides. It's a lot. A lot of what I have in here is going to be a little bit redundant, so I'll try to add a little bit of flavor to it. But obviously, if there are questions, I'd be happy to address them at the end. All right, so quick agenda. Really, I want to get right into this because I think this is at the heart of Representative Delperdang's question is how do we fund transportation in Kansas? Transportation is funded through various revenue streams. The majority of them are constitutionally protected. The one that is not constitutionally protected is our sales tax. So a portion of the sales tax, a graduated portion, it was originally envisioned to be about 17% of all sales tax revenue would be directed to the State Highway Fund. Because of adjustments to sales tax, in particular, the decrease of food sales tax, to keep the State Highway Fund whole, it was decided and voted on to increase the portion of sales tax that goes to transportation, that goes to the State Highway Fund, increase it to 18%. All of these feed into really two big pots of money. One, a special city and county highway fund, which is really a pass-through that goes straight from motor fuels tax into our counties. It's distributed by formula. That formula is in statute. I do not have that formula memorized, but obviously we can give you that formula if you need it. The rest of the money goes directly into the State Highway Fund. We talked about the rail fund and some of our other special revenue funds. The majority of those funds traditionally have been supported by the State Highway Fund because they are a part of our overall transportation system. And so we distribute that money into those funds as dictated by statutes. So both of the rail funds that were consolidated last year, they were $5 million each. So $10 million of state funds are going into the short line rail improvement program right now. The additional funding that was discussed, that Merle discussed, that $30 million is really because of a federal grant that we were awarded. So that is additional federal funds that went into that specific fund, that special revenue fund that is there to support rail infrastructure. So each of those funds, we have opportunities to go after federal grants to help support and really leverage the impact of those funds. And so we do that. When we do that, those funds can go up. If you have any other questions about that, or if you want more details about any of our special revenue funds, we can provide more detailed information. So for fiscal year 24, Merle covered it well. This is what we're expecting for our revenue sources for fiscal year 24. As you can see, about 1/3 of our revenue stream comes from that portion of the sales tax that gets directed into the state highway fund. Motor fuels tax is also a big portion, as well as federal funds. Federal funds and sales tax are two funding streams that have been growing over the course of the program. Motor fuels tax has remained steady. The balance of the funding is really from some special revenues generated through registration licenses and local contributions and local funding to projects. In fiscal year 25, we're expecting a similar revenue. The one caveat here is that we do have our bonding as part of revenue in fiscal year 25. Just as a recap, we are expecting to bond in fiscal year 25 to help pay for the large onslaught of projects that we'll be doing and kicking off in fiscal year 25. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. And if you want to look at our revenue stream over time, the main thing to look at here is really that steady increase in sales tax revenue, and then the kind of steady non-increase or non-decrease of our motor fuels tax. Obviously, as we monitor the motor fuels tax going into the future, looking at things like electric vehicles, depending on their adoption rate, which you can have a debate about how quickly they might get adopted in the state of Kansas, but it is something that we are seeing. They are getting adopted more. At the very least, we expect more fuel-efficient vehicles to be taking over in the fleet. As those more fuel-efficient vehicles come in, we know that will have an impact on that motor fuels tax revenue stream. We are having conversations about that now. Obviously, as we move in through this program, we don't expect a big impact. As we go into the next program, we're going to have real conversations about what it looks like to replace that revenue that could be lost through decreasing motor fuels tax. A little bit about our bonding expectation. The IKE program had always anticipated a certain level of bonding. And it really depended on how quickly we were putting projects out, and then also things like inflation. Inflation has had a huge impact on what we've been able to do and how much it has cost for us to deliver our projects. As we have monitored that, for us to continue to deliver the projects that we have committed to, we will have to bond at $200 million in fiscal year 25 to be able to make all of those commitments and to put those projects out to construction. I will tell you, it is my commitment to continue evaluating whatever we can do to minimize or eliminate the use of bonding in the future. But really, we need to make sure that we're balancing the needs of the program, the needs of the communities and the projects that we've committed to, along with our revenue streams. Over time, you can see what our outstanding debt is projected to be, what it has been, what it's projected to be, and really what the debt has come from. As you can see, this year we'll be paying off our last debts from the Comprehensive Transportation Program, which went from 2000 to 2009. And that's bonding that happened in 2004. We'll get that off the books this year. And then we'll be working to pay down the rest of our T-Works debt, which was about $2 billion of bonding that was taken out for T-Works. We do not anticipate taking out that much bonding for IKE. Right now, we're projecting about $1.2 billion in bonding, and you can see how that bonding gets spread out over time in terms of debt payments. Like I said, we are actively looking at strategies to help reduce the amount of bonding that we have to take out in this program, because it will impact, really what we can do in the next program and beyond. The one way that we are looking at, one revenue stream that we're looking at as potentially to decrease the amount of bonding is federal funds. That's one of our big revenue streams. There are lots of opportunities out there for discretionary grants. We are pursuing multiple opportunities for discretionary grants for projects that we have currently on the books. If we can win a grant award for any of these projects that we already have on the books, it obviously offsets the money that we would have needed from bonding to be able to pay for that project. So we are being very strategic and being very aggressive about going after these federal grants. Another one of the revenue streams that through the federal government that is becoming more significant is this idea of August redistribution. And really what that is from a very high level is any funds that are not spent by other states at the end of a federal fiscal year get put into a pot and are opportunity to be redistributed to states that can make use of those funds. So we are working hard also aggressively to set ourselves up to be able to bring as many of these federal funds in to take care of projects that we already have on the books. Because if we can offset the money that we are planning on spending on state funds that we're planning on spending on those projects and offset that with federal funds, that allows us the flexibility to not have to bond as much. So there will be more to come on that, but just know that we are aggressively pursuing those avenues. Talked about state highway transfers. Representative Delperding, I appreciate your question. The transfers that you were talking about from the state highway fund to the various fee funds are not considered transfers like the Bank of KDOT. The Bank of KDOT is really represented in those blue up there, which were the extraordinary transfers that were transferred out of the state highway fund to fill gaps in the budget for the state general fund. That bank was closed after fiscal year 22. So in fiscal year 23 and beyond, those are what we would call ordinary transfers. Those are the typical transfers that we make to other state agencies to help support the mission of transportation. So think Highway Patrol, Department of Education, Department of Revenue. Those are some of the main ones. Merle gave a great summary of it. We have a summary also showing the different transfers that we're expecting in fiscal year 24 and 25. Now I'm going to turn the page and we're going to look at the other side of the ledger, which are our expenditures. Our fiscal year 25 expenditures are expected to be $2.3 billion. And as you can see, about 70% of that is in construction projects. So that's all phases of our construction projects, including design and purchasing right away. So this is going to be a big year, fiscal year 25, in terms of the amount of construction that we're going to be letting, similar to what we did in fiscal year 23. We are projecting, if I remember right, about $1.3 billion. I think that's right, of lettings in fiscal year 25. And that includes really big projects like the Polk Quincy Viaduct here in downtown Topeka, the first phase of the South Lawrence Trafficway, a major bridge replacement in Kansas City, and then the East Kellogg US 54 expansion down in Sedgwick County. All of those are by themselves major projects, but put them in 1 year, and it makes for a rather large year of expenditures, thus the need for the bonding in fiscal year 25. And just I like to throw this in just to remind people that we really have to manage two different books here. One of them is what you guys debate, which is our budget, right? That's that top line. So that is, when you give us budget authority, that is for us to let a project. We don't spend all that money all at once, right? That money is spent out over time. So we also have to manage cash flow for every single one of those projects and putting them all together, making sure that at the end of the day, and really at the end of the fiscal year, we have enough money to meet all of our obligations for the end of the fiscal year. And then be able to proceed and make payouts going into the next fiscal year. So we have to manage this, and we are managing it. Once again, the reason we need bonding is really to make sure that we make cash flow commitments and we're able to continue to deliver on those projects. A little bit about our budget structure. Our budget structure is really broken into two different components. So that $2.3 billion, only about $340 million of it is really what you guys authorize for us to spend. That is our operating budget. The rest of it is managed by cash flow. And that is the $1.9 million or $1.9 billion or so that we will put into our projects and making sure our projects get delivered. So our operating budget, you can see, is for salary and wages for our staff, highway maintenance, heavy equipment, IT systems, and utilities for our buildings. And then obviously the other side of the budget is really for our construction projects in all phases of our construction projects. And that's really just to make sure that we're able to continue to deliver those projects as we commit to and as we expect. So I'm going to focus in then on the agency operations budget. So the $334 million, as you can see there, this is just a trend of what our operating budget has done over the last 10 years or so. And as you can see, it's been gradual increases. And so we have been able to manage our budget well. We have not had a major increase like you might expect with the inflation that we've seen. We've been able to really manage our budget well, making sure that we're meeting all of our internal obligations and still be able to grow our capacity to be able to deliver projects. And here you can see what I'm talking about. In previous fiscal years, we did not always utilize our entire budget. We're being very strategic now about how we establish our budgets and making sure that we are able to make use of all of the budgetary authority that you've given us. And so what that means often is at the end of the year, if we see changes in budget, things like snow and ice events that may not have happened like we would have expected, and we have a little bit of extra budget, we will strategically put that towards things like equipment to make sure that we are keeping our equipment modernized, and we will look at how we can replace our equipment quicker. And here you can see just our agency ops compared to our overall budget. I think the one thing I'd just like to point out here is that we have held our agency ops pretty steady even when our project budgets have gone up, when the overall construction budget has gone up. So we are continuing to try to be as efficient as possible in delivering those construction projects and do all of our maintenance work out on the highways. Fiscal year 25, our operating budget, just some of the changes compared to the 24 budget. The biggest one there is our capital outlay. And really that's restoring a shift of 2024 capital outlay expenditures that covered needs and salaries and wages and contractual services. So in 24, we shifted funds from our capital outlay to be able to cover salaries and wages because we did a targeted market pay increase that was approved by you and the governor, but it was not funded. So we funded that out of our capital outlay expenses. This is just restoring what we did then to our projected budget level. And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit about meeting targets. The Ike legislation has several targets very specifically in it that we are to meet. This one is actually not in there, but it is a commitment and a priority of the Ike legislation to continue to make sure that we are preserving our system to an adequate level. And so that means that we have to be targeted and make sure that we are spending appropriately all across the state. So we have set up regional targets for spending for preservation dollars. So preservation, just as a reminder, is really taking care of the system that we already have, not expanding it, not modernizing it, just really taking care of our existing highway and bridge system. And you can see these regional targets. We are on target for every region in the state 3.5 years in, about 35% of the program. You see every single region we are on target for spending in that region. Now, modernization and expansion, we were required to come up with regional targets that would make sure that that our spending on modernization and expansion projects was really distributed appropriately all across the state. So we set up targets that you can see there that required minimum investment by 2025. We are actually required to establish a mid-program target. We are on target. We have actually met that requirement in 2 of our districts, our Northeast District and our South Central District. And we are on target to meeting those mid-program requirements in the other 4 districts by 2025. And what this looks like in terms of our modernization expansion projects, $2 billion of projects currently in our development and construction pipeline. We just announced $350 million in the fall to be added to our construction pipeline. So that is a commitment to construct those projects. It includes finishing out the South Lawrence Trafficway in Lawrence, and then also a large interchange expansion project, really taking care of a major issue in Olathe. We will also be having an announcement here in the next few weeks for adding projects to our development pipeline, which came out of our local consult last fall. And then I believe this is my last slide. I just wanted to talk a little bit about aviation. This is one of those special revenue funds that is typically funded out of the State Highway Fund. We were last legislative session of 2023, there was a Senate bill that came on board that would really look at increasing the amount of state highway funds that would be put into aviation up to $18 million. There was some real questions in my mind. Being new to the position, I wanted to make sure that I understood why that number came about. Is that the appropriate number? Had we studied it? And the short answer was we hadn't. It was really just kind of a guess and a way to really bring this to everybody's attention. We put together a joint task force between KDOT and the Kansas Airport Association. Appreciate their partnership in this and their willingness to really help us dig into understanding what the long-term needs of our airports are. We know that airports add a lot to our communities, lots of economic impact to really our rural communities all across the state. But maybe more importantly, maybe underappreciated is how important they are to the safety mission of KDOT. Air ambulance service is a critical feature of many of our airports, but not all. And we've identified through this task force some places where there are some real gaps in air ambulance service in the state. And with this additional funding, we'll be able to not only take care of the airports and the runways that we have, but really look at strategically, how do we expand specific airports to help increase air ambulance service and drive down the amount of time that it takes to get a critical patient to a hospital. And with that, I would stand for any questions you might have. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Reed, what kind of strings are attached to federal dollars nowadays?
Well, that's a loaded question, Representative. It's really the same strings. There have been some modifications over the last couple of years. So, some of the strings that I'll say that have always been there or have been there in recent memory are things like, I'm going to use the word NEPA, which is really an environmental assessment of any project using federal funds. That is absolutely there. Anytime right-of-way is being acquired, you need to go through the Uniform Relocation Act. And really, that's just an assurance that when we are purchasing right-of-way, we're doing it in a fair way, no matter where you are. Some of the new strings that are attached are really about the materials that we put into our projects. Buy America has been expanded to include more materials than just steel. That is having impacts on our projects. But it's having impacts on projects all across the nation. It is a national conversation that we are participating in. Yeah.
Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got kind of a series of questions. You can stop me at any time, but going back where how does Kansas fund transportation? You have the blue box that said sales tax, and you mentioned 18%. So, are you saying 18% of the overall budget comes from sales tax?
No, Representative, what that indicates is 18% of every dollar of sales tax that comes into the state general fund gets transferred into the state highway.
Okay,
fund.
So it doesn't matter what the purchase is, it's just sales tax in general. Okay. And then you had mentioned funds for the short line rail. What specifically is that? Yeah, so the short line rail improvement programs, those are really for suppliers and our short line providers across the state. They are typically used for track improvements. A lot of our short line railroads out there are running on tracks that
are older and not up to modern standards. So sometimes it's modernizing them so that they are able to carry the heavier loads and a faster speed. So increasing efficiency. I'd say one of the bigger and reasons why it is important for the State Highway Fund is because the more that is hauled on these trains, on these short line trains, means fewer trucks often on our highways. So it does have an impact on our long-term investing in our highways.
Because I know south of Wichita, there's some track damage or so. Is that part of that funding then?
It would be applicable, yes. So each of the short line providers would need to apply. It is a competitive grant program. So if they want to make those improvements, they would apply to the grant when it is open, and then we would evaluate it and award appropriately.
Okay. And then currently, what is the fuel tax? What percentage?
Well, it's not a percentage. Or are you talking about percentage of our revenue stream?
Or
What was
go ahead.
the actual fuel tax rate? 12 cents or what?
24 cents per gallon.
Per gallon of.
And that's for diesel and gas.
26 for diesel.
So it's 26 on diesel and 24 on gasoline.
6 cents per gallon for diesel, 24 cents per gallon for gasoline.
May I continue? Okay. Do any funds get pulled out of KTA that come over to you guys, or is that totally separate?
That is totally separate. We do partner with KTA. We share resources, and so sometimes there is some crossover there, but it's really just helping pay the expenses of either agency when we help each other out.
And then let's see, you had federal funds. I noticed it took a drop between 24 and 25. You showed federal funds 29% in 24, and then it was 24% in 25. What caused that? Is it one-time monies or?
Yeah, so our federal funds are reimbursement based. So it's really how much work we're doing often dictates how much federal funds we're getting. So as we do work, as a contractor submits an invoice to us, we pay that invoice. We also submit a form to the federal government and get reimbursed a portion of that invoice that we
project specific.
It is project specific. Yes.
Okay. And the bonding limitation, is that statutory? You mentioned 18% cannot exceed.
Yes.
So that's currently, okay. And I had one more. Okay. And I know we had talked, I made the comment about the bank of KDOT. I thought didn't we pass some statute a couple of years ago to basically do away with that or start mitigating it down? And it looked like on the one chart, it was really.
I'm not aware of a statute. I would say that gets handled through appropriations every year, right? Not by statute.
Because you had made a comment that it was trending downward on that one. So.
Yep. So through your guys' appropriations, we were able to appropriate less and less out of the state highway fund into the state general fund.
Okay. All right. I think that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for answering.
Yeah, thank you.
Representative Resman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad K10 is finally happening out with that south loop around Lawrence. But can we talk about further east in Johnson County, especially around DeSoto and east of there? As far as I heard, there's a study that's nearly completed on a third lane.
Yeah. So we are just wrapping up a study right now to look at the options for, and really the scope was to look at the options for 6 laning from the Johnson County line east to I-435. So that study is just getting complete. It has not shown up on my desk yet, so I don't know what the final recommendations. I don't know what the cost estimates are yet. But we'd be happy to share that with you guys as we get that study finalized. I will say one component that was brought into that was looking at tolling, because just like on US 69 Express through Overland Park, we evaluated tolling on that high traffic corridor for managed lane. We looked at a similar model on K10, and what we found is that it wasn't the right solution for K10.
All right, thank you. I happened to see a news article yesterday about the weight of vehicles and guardrails apparently the guardrails that we currently have aren't sufficient to stop some of these vehicles from going through them. Are you guys looking at doing a study or upgrading some of these guardrails?
So I appreciate the question. I'm not aware of that study or that issue. We can get back to you on that, and we'll get some of our technical experts to weigh in.
Some of the video they were showing, some of these electric cars are going right through these barriers. A couple of years ago, I know you guys were shorthanded and in a number of facilities, and I was just wondering if you've been able to hire enough to now cover some of your shortages.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a really good question. We have had an increase in hiring from this year compared to last year. But what I will say is it is not universal across the state. There are still some parts of the state that we are struggling to hire in, specifically in the major metro areas, and then also in far southwest Kansas. When we look at Dodge City and Garden City, the markets there, there's just a lot of industry that we're competing against. So yes, we have seen progress. I would say we still have some work to be done.
Last question. And a couple weeks ago, you handed out our flyer about the Heartland Flyer.
Yes.
Can you tell me where that stands?
Yeah. So we are doing a corridor ID study right now, and I believe at the end of 25 or spring of 25, we'll be coming out with the results of that corridor ID, and really that will help establish the planning level analysis that needs to go into getting that corridor going forward. It will help inform what that corridor is going to cost to get going, what the operating cost is going to be, what the usage is projected to be. That will really help educate all of us in understanding the viability of that corridor long term.
And I just have one quick one. And I don't know if you have the budget analysis in front of you, but for us, it's on page 6. The engineering contractual services. So, and you were just talking about staffing issues, so this could be that. But is there a way to bring in some of that in-house to lower some of that cost? Because it looks like it's about $48 million.
It's a good question. Yes, it requires us hiring and training staff and bringing them up to speed. So that's what we're working on right now. I just received some really good news in mid-January that KDOT had seen an uptick in our hires for what we call engineering technicians. Those are the folks that are out really doing the construction inspection. They're really, really young. I just met with a bunch of them last week down in Hutchinson. We're going to be throwing a lot at them really quick to try to get them up to speed. But yeah, really to help bring that number down, because the more we can bring that number down is really the more work that we can do on our highway projects. Now, that being said, because I've got some consultant friends who are in the room, we absolutely do need consultants to help us deliver our projects. It's extremely important. Our work ebbs and flows. So we can't staff for the max. We obviously don't want to staff for the minimum. We want to staff somewhere reasonable in between, and we want to be able to fill in as needed with outside consulting work.
Thank you. Any further questions for the secretary? All right. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
If there's nothing further from the committee, we are adjourned.